The day my family removed me from my father's will, they celebrated. I know this because my brother sent me the text that was meant for my sister. It said, "It's done. She didn't even fight back. Told you she wouldn't." And then a champagne glass emoji, that small, careless cruelty of people who believe they are completely safe. I read it twice. I set my phone face down on my kitchen counter. I stood very still for a moment. And then I felt something move through me that was not grief and not anger, but something cleaner and colder than either. Clarity. Because what my brother did not know, what none of them knew, was that I had not simply accepted being removed from my father's will. I had needed them to do it, and they had finally, completely, irreversibly done it. But to understand what I mean, you need to understand my father. And to understand my father, you need to understand that Walter Aldridge was the most deliberate man who ever lived. Everything he did on purpose. Every decision he made had architecture underneath it. He did not act from impulse. He did not act from emotion. He acted from a set of principles so deeply embedded in him that by the time I was old enough to recognize them, they had already shaped everything about who I was. My father built Aldridge Logistics over 35 years. He started with one truck, a second-hand GPS unit, and a contract with a regional grocery distributor that paid barely enough to cover fuel and time. He built it through consistency and stubbornness and the specific intelligence of someone who understands that patience applied with enough precision eventually becomes power, into a fleet operation with 42 trucks, distribution contracts across 4 states, and a reputation that had made his name a known quantity in regional logistics. He was not a warm man in the conventional sense. He did not hug easily. He did not say "I love you" unless it cost him something to say it, which meant that when he said it, you believed it completely. He sat at the head of our dinner table like a man who understood that the table itself was a kind of document, that what happened at it, who was present, what was said, how people treated each other, all of it was information he was filing. He believed in what he called demonstrated character. Not what people said about themselves. Not how they performed in front of an audience. What they did when something real was at stake, and they thought no one was watching. I am my father's youngest child. I have a brother named Derek, 5 years older than me, and a sister named Pamela, 3 years older. We grew up in the same house in the same city, sat at the same dinner table, and absorbed completely different lessons from the man at the head of it. Derek learned that the business was the destination. He joined Aldridge Logistics at 23, worked his way into a senior operations role, and positioned himself over 15 years as my father's natural successor. He was capable, genuinely capable. I want to be fair about that, but his capability was always in service of the inheritance rather than the work itself. Derek wanted what the business represented. The arrival, the title, the announcement of it. He loved what owning it would say about him more than he loved what running it would require. Pamela learned that proximity is its own currency. She stayed close to my parents, attended every family event, managed the social architecture of the household with the skill of someone who understands that being present and being essential can be made to look identical. She called my mother every morning. She organized the holidays. She inserted herself into every decision about my parents' lives with the gentle persistence of someone whose helpfulness was indistinguishable from control, until you looked at it closely, which most people didn't. And I learned something different. I learned to pay attention. I learned to listen before speaking. I learned to build things slowly, to let patience do what urgency couldn't, to understand that the most important moves in any situation are the ones that don't look like moves at all. I learned this from my father, which is why, when the time came, I was the only one who understood what he had actually built. But I'm ahead of myself. You need the middle before you can have the end. The shift in my family started when my father got sick. Not suddenly, gradually, the way serious illness tends to arrive, in small announcements that get louder over time. He was diagnosed with a heart condition when he was 68. Not immediately life-threatening, but the kind of diagnosis that reorders a family's attention the way a stone dropped in water reorders the surface. Everything ripples outward from the center. Derek's attention sharpened immediately. I noticed it at the first family dinner after the diagnosis. The way he positioned himself beside my father, the way he steered conversations toward the business, toward the future, toward what the transition of leadership would look like, and when. He was not crass about it. He was practiced. 15 years of positioning had made him fluent in the language of concern that sounds like love, but is actually inventory. Pamela shifted her energy toward my mother. My mother, whose name was Gloria, was a woman who processed worry through activity. She cooked more, organized more, called more people more often. Pamela understood this and inserted herself into it, becoming my mother's primary support system in a way that gave her access to every conversation, every decision, every piece of information that moved through the household. And me? I was the youngest, the one who had not joined the business, who had built my own career in financial consulting, who lived 40 minutes away and came to Sunday dinners and called my father twice a week and talked to him about things that were not the business, books he was reading, decisions he was turning over, the specific topics that interested a man who had spent his life building something practical and was, in his later years, more interested in ideas than in operations. My father and I had always had this. A particular frequency of conversation that existed between us and, I think, only between us. He talked to Derek about the business. He talked to Pamela about the family. He talked to me about everything else, about what he believed, about what he had learned, about what he wished he had understood earlier, and what he had gotten right. These were not tender conversations in the soft sense. They were honest ones. The kind that happen between people who trust each other enough to say the true thing. I did not see, at first, how much this frequency alarmed my siblings. I should have seen it. I see it now. But at the time I was focused on my father, on his health, on his mind, on making sure that whatever time we had was spent the way he wanted to spend it, and I was not paying the necessary attention to what was happening around the edges of those visits. What was happening was this. Derek and Pamela had decided, independently and then together, that my relationship with my father was a threat to the inheritance they believed was already theirs. My closeness with him was in their reading influence. My conversations with him were in their interpretation, lobbying. Every afternoon I spent at the house became, in the story they constructed between themselves, evidence of a campaign. I found this out the way I found out most things in this story, after the fact, through documentation, in the specific form of a text thread my sister accidentally included me in when she meant to add someone else. The thread was between Derek and Pamela. It had been going for 3 months. I scrolled up and read the entire thing. What I found was a coordinated campaign to limit my access to my father, influence his estate planning, and position themselves as his primary advisors in a way that excluded me from any meaningful role in decisions about the future of the family and the business. There were specific messages. Derek, we need to get him to update the documents before she talks him into something. Pamela, I already told Mom that Claire has been pressuring him. Mom's worried. Derek, good.
Keep that going.
If he thinks she's a source of stress, it helps us.
Claire.
That's me. My name is Claire Aldridge, and my sister had been telling my mother that I was pressuring our father, a sick man, into changing his will in my favor. She had been manufacturing a narrative and feeding it to my mother, who loved all her children but trusted Pamela's proximity and had no reason to question what her daughter told her. I sat with my phone in my hand and read that thread for a long time. And here is the thing I want you to understand about what I felt. I was not shocked. I was not devastated. I was something more complicated than either, the specific feeling of someone who has suspected something for long enough that confirmation is not a blow, but a completion. The picture was now whole. I could see its full shape for the first time. I did not respond to the thread. I did not confront anyone. I screenshotted every message, dated and saved them, and I went to see my father the following Sunday with a specific question I had been turning over since the moment I finished reading. I needed to know whether my father already knew. We were in his study, the room I loved most in the house, the room where he kept his books and his papers, and the framed photograph of the original truck that started everything. He was in his chair by the window, reading something I didn't catch the title of before he set it down. I sat across from him and I said, without preamble, because we had never needed preamble. Dad, what do you actually know about what Derek and Pamela have been doing? He looked at me for a moment. A long moment, the specific kind he used when he was deciding something. And then he said, more than they think I know. I waited. Tell me what you found, he said. I showed him the thread. He read it the way he read everything, thoroughly, without visible reaction, to the end. He handed my phone back. They started moving on the estate documents about 4 months ago, he said. They've spoken to my attorney twice, separately, without telling me both had been in. My attorney told me. I looked at him. What are they asking for? They want the business split between the two of them. They want the house to go to their mother, which it always was going to. And they want you removed from the secondary beneficiary designations I had set up. He paused. They told my attorney I had expressed a wish to make those changes, but hadn't done the paperwork myself. I felt the cold settle in me again. That's not true.
No, he said.
It's not. We were quiet for a moment. What are you going to do?
I said.
He looked at me with the expression he used when he was about to say something he had been preparing for a long time. I'm going to let them finish what they started, he said. And then we're going to find out what they're made of. I understood him completely. Not because he explained it, he didn't, not then, but because I was my father's daughter, and I had been listening to him think out loud for 30 years, and I knew the shape of his decisions before they were finished. He was going to let them show him exactly who they were. And he had designed something to catch it. What happened next, I didn't know in its full detail until after my father died. I want to be precise about this because the story requires precision. I knew my father was aware of what Derek and Pamela were doing, and I knew he had something in mind, but I did not know the specific structure of what he had built until the reading of the will. He did not tell me. This was deliberate. He needed my response to what happened to be genuine, not performed, not managed, but real. He needed me to be as surprised as everyone else in certain moments so that the integrity of the whole thing was preserved. My father died 14 months after that conversation. His heart, which had been a managed condition for 3 years, made a decision in October that the doctors had said was always possible. He was 71.
He was lucid until the end.
He died in his own house, in his own bed, with my mother beside him, and I was there within an hour of the call. Derek arrived an hour after me. Pamela had been there already. She had been at the house more than ever in the final weeks, and I had watched this without comment, understanding it for what it was while also acknowledging that proximity to a dying parent, whatever motivates it, is also sometimes just love. I gave her that. Whatever she was doing for her own reasons, she was also losing her father. We all were. The will reading was 3 weeks after the funeral. My father's attorney, a man named Gerald Marsh who had handled Walter Aldridge's legal affairs for 22 years, requested the family gather at his office. My mother, Derek, Pamela, and me. I want to describe that room, because the room matters. Gerald Marsh's conference room was the particular kind that estate attorneys favor, wood-paneled, quiet, deliberately neutral, the kind of space designed to receive news of any kind without amplifying it. We sat around a long table, my mother at the head, Derek to her right, Pamela beside him, me across from them both. Gerald opened the documents. He began reading. The house went to my mother, as always planned. A portion of the liquid assets went to a charitable foundation my father had established years earlier. The family cabin in Michigan, a property my siblings had always assumed would be divided between them, went to me outright. I watched Derek's jaw tighten at that and said nothing. And then Gerald reached the business. Aldridge Logistics. 42 trucks, 4 state contracts, 35 years of built value. Gerald looked up from the document. He looked at Derek and Pamela specifically, and the look had something in it that I would understand better in about 45 seconds. He said, I need to read this section carefully, because there is a conditional structure that requires full explanation. Derek straightened. Pamela's hands folded on the table. Gerald read. My father had written a provision into the will. A loyalty clause, not a standard legal instrument, but a specific, custom-designed condition that Gerald had apparently spent considerable time structuring with him over the previous year. The provision stated that the primary beneficiaries of the business inheritance were subject to a conduct review that had been built into the estate structure. Specifically, any beneficiary who had, in the 2 years prior to the testator's death, taken actions to exclude, disinherit, or misrepresent a family member to the estate attorney or to the family, actions documented and verified by the estate attorney's records, would be disqualified from their inheritance share. The disqualified share would transfer, in full, to the excluded party. Gerald set down the document.
He looked at Derek.
He looked at Pamela. Mr. Aldridge provided me with documentation, Gerald said carefully, over the past 14 months, of 2 separate visits to this office by members of this family in which statements were made about his intentions that were inconsistent with his actual documented wishes. He also provided records of communications that he felt constituted an effort to manipulate his estate planning against the interests of another family member. The room was completely silent. Derek said, "What communications?" Gerald opened a second folder. Your father had been aware of a text message thread for approximately 11 months. He provided it to me as supporting documentation for the conditional clause. Pamela made a sound. Small, involuntary. The conduct review has been completed, Gerald said. Based on the documented record, the conditional clause has been triggered. He looked at me. Miss Aldridge, your father wanted you to receive this. He slid an envelope across the table. My name on the front in my father's handwriting. I picked it up.
I did not open it yet.
Gerald continued. The business transfers in its entirety to Claire Aldridge, per the activated conditional provision. Derek and Pamela Aldridge's shares have been disqualified under the terms your father established. Derek stood up. This isn't legal. You can't create a provision that eliminates beneficiaries based on. Your father had 22 years of legal counsel on his estate planning, Gerald said, in the tone of a man who anticipated this response and is not moved by it. The conditional clause was reviewed by 2 independent estate attorneys at his request. It is legally sound. You are welcome to challenge it, which is your right. Your father anticipated that possibility and left a message for that circumstance as well. He slid a second envelope across the table. Derek's name on it. Derek did not pick it up. Pamela was looking at the table. She had not said a word since Gerald began reading the conditional clause. She was doing the specific calculation of someone whose plan has just been run through in its full reverse, understanding the mechanism, understanding how long it had been in place, understanding what her own actions had set in motion. She looked at me. I looked back at her. You knew, she said. Not an accusation. More like a person arriving at a fact. I knew Dad was aware, I said. I didn't know the specific structure of what he built.
He didn't tell me.
Because he needed you to be surprised, she said. Yes, I said. She was quiet.
He was testing us, Derek said.
His voice had an edge, but underneath the edge was something else. Something that sounded, if you listened carefully, like a man recognizing the shape of a judgment he had brought on himself. He was documenting you, I said. There's a difference. A test implies a setup. He didn't set anything up. He just watched what you did when you thought he wasn't watching. And he kept a record. Derek sat back down. The room held that for a moment. My mother had not spoken during any of this. She was sitting at the head of the table with her hands folded and her eyes, which had been dry through the funeral and dry through 3 weeks of arrangements, finally wet. Not crying, containing something. The specific expression of a woman who has understood something about her family that she cannot unlearn. Gloria, Gerald said gently, your husband left a letter for you as well. He asked that you read it privately. She nodded. She did not look at Derek or Pamela. She looked at me. And what was in her face was complicated. The love of a mother for all her children, the grief of a woman who has just lost her husband, and something newer and more specific. An accounting. The beginning of an understanding about what had been happening in her household while she had been managing her worry through proximity to a daughter who was managing her. I'm sorry, she said.
To me. Just to me.
I know, Mom, I said. I held the envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting all the way through the remainder of that meeting, through the parking lot, through the drive home. I sat at my kitchen table, my apartment, the life I had built entirely on my own terms because I had never been waiting for my father's business to define me, and I opened it. His handwriting, dense, deliberate, the handwriting of a man who considered every word. He wrote, Claire, if you're reading this, they finished what they started. I want you to know I'm not sorry for how this ends for them. I'm sorry it had to be structured this way at all. A man should not have to build a trap to protect one child from the others. I built this one not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I needed to know, with certainty, what this family was made of before I left it. You already knew. You had known for years and said nothing, which is exactly what I raised you to do. Patience is the most powerful thing I ever taught you. I hope you know it came from watching you as much as you learned it from watching me. The business is yours. Run it or sell it. That decision is yours entirely. What is not negotiable is this: you earned it. Not because of what they did, but because of what you didn't do, which was the harder thing. I love you, Dad. I read it 3 times. And then I set it down, and I let myself feel all of it at once. The grief of his absence, the weight of what he had left me, the complicated, unresolvable texture of winning something that you wished had never needed to be won. What followed in the weeks and months after the will reading was not clean because nothing real ever is. Derek challenged the will. His attorney filed a formal objection within 2 weeks. The challenge was reviewed and ultimately dismissed. My father's attorney had, as promised, anticipated it and prepared accordingly. The 2 independent reviews held. The conditional clause stood. Derek's legal fees were his own. Pamela did not file a challenge. She called me 3 weeks after the reading, in a voice I had never heard from her, stripped of the social management, the careful presentation, the warm performance she deployed as naturally as breathing. I need to ask you something, she said.
Go ahead, I said.
Did you know about the clause before the reading? I knew Dad was aware of what you and Derek were doing, I said. I didn't know the specific structure of the will. He kept that from me deliberately. Why didn't you warn us? She said. I thought about this question, about the right way to answer it. Because you were doing something wrong, I said. And I needed to know if you would stop on your own. If either of you would reach a point where you said, this is too far, this is not who I want to be, I'm going to stop. A silence. You never did, I said. Either of you. Another silence. Longer. No, she said. We didn't. I know, I said. Are you going to run the business? She said. I haven't decided yet, I said. I'm taking 6 months to assess it properly before I make any decisions. If you need anyone, she stopped. Started again. If you need operational support, Derek knows the... Pamela, I said gently. I appreciate that. I'll let you know what I need. But I'm going to figure out what I need first. She said she understood. I believe she did, in the specific new way that she was understanding many things, with the particular clarity that arrives when the story you had been operating inside turns out to have had a different structure than you thought. My mother and I had the most honest conversation of our adult relationship 2 months after the reading. She came to my apartment, the first time she had come to me rather than expecting me to come to her, and she sat at my kitchen table and told me what had been in my father's letter to her. I will not share all of it. It was her letter, her private accounting. But she told me the parts she wanted me to know, and what she told me was this. My father had known for 2 years that Pamela had been feeding her a narrative about me. He had documented when the narrative started and tracked how it evolved. He had, in his quiet and deliberate way, let my mother know, posthumously, gently, without accusation, that she had been managed, that her belief about me had been constructed rather than arrived at. My mother cried at my kitchen table. Real tears, the kind she had been holding back since October. I believed her, she said. She told me you were pressuring him, and I believed her without asking you. I know, I said. I'm your mother, she said. I should have asked you. Yes, I said. You should have. I'm asking you now, she said. 30 years too late, But I'm asking, what have I missed? What have I been getting wrong? And I told her. Not in anger, not with the accumulated grievance of years, but honestly and specifically. The dinners where her attention organized around my siblings' presentations, the decisions where my quietness was interpreted as having nothing to say, the years of being the child who was fine because she made no noise about not being fine. My mother listened to all of it. She did not defend herself or explain herself or offer alternative interpretations. She just listened, which was the thing I had needed from her for longer than I could fully say. "I have to fix things with you," she said when I finished. "Separately from Derek and Pamela. You and me." "I'd like that," I said. "We are working on it. Imperfectly, slowly, in the way that real things get built. Derek and I have not spoken since the will challenge failed. That door may open eventually. I'm not closing it permanently because permanent closures require certainty I don't have about how people can and cannot change. But it is not open right now and I am not forcing it. Pamela and I speak occasionally. The relationship is cautious and careful and more honest than it has ever been because the performance layer has been removed by events that were more powerful than performance. She is trying to understand what she did and why she did it, which is the necessary work and which I respect even as I maintain appropriate distance. I took the 6 months I promised myself before making any decision about the business. At the end of those 6 months, I brought in a consulting firm, reviewed the operations thoroughly, and made a decision my father would have found both surprising and appropriate. I promoted the company's operations director, a man named Thomas who had been with Aldridge Logistics for 16 years and knew every contract and every driver by name, to president. I took a board chair position. The business continues. It is being run by someone who loves it for what it requires rather than what it announces. My father would have called that demonstrated character. He would have said it quietly, without making a thing of it, and gone back to his book. I think about him constantly. Not with grief exactly, with a specific ongoing conversation of someone who is shaped by another person so thoroughly that the shaping continues after the person is gone. I hear his voice when I'm making a decision. I feel the weight of his patience when I'm tempted to move too fast. I understand, more fully every year, what he was building in me alongside the business, and why he trusted the former more than the latter to last. My brother sent a champagne emoji the day they thought they had won. My father had been planning the response to that moment for over a year. That is the difference between people who understand power and people who only want it. The ones who only want it celebrate too early. They confuse the beginning of a victory for the end. They send the text to the wrong person because they're already toasting and not paying attention. The ones who understand it wait. They document. They build something so structurally sound that when it lands, there is no defense against it and no alternative interpretation. My father built a 35-year company on that principle. He built me on it too. I didn't argue when they erased me from the documents. I didn't argue because my father had not raised me to argue. He raised me to wait. He raised me to watch. He raised me to understand that the most powerful move in any room is the one that doesn't look like a move. And he designed, in the last 14 months of his life, a will that would make all of that visible, not to me, but to the people who had underestimated both of us. They thought I was too quiet to fight back. They didn't understand that quiet is not weakness. Quiet is patience. And patience, in the hands of the right person, with the right foundation, at the right moment, is the most devastating thing in the world. My father knew that. He spent his whole life proving it. And in the end, so did I.